You've heard this sound thousands of times. On records, in movies, in songs you know by heart. It has a name, and that name came from a lie. This is the story of a joke that George Martin told John Lennon inside a recording studio in London, and how that joke accidentally gave a name to one of the most iconic sounds in the history of music. It's 1966. The Beatles are no longer a touring band. They've walked off the road, permanently, and locked themselves inside Abbey Road Studios with one singular obsession: make sounds no one has ever made before. John Lennon, in particular, is restless. He doesn't want to sound like himself anymore. He wants his voice to feel disembodied, otherworldly, like it's coming from somewhere that doesn't exist on any map. But achieving that in 1966 is not a matter of clicking a plugin. There are no plugins. There is only tape, physics, and the quiet genius of a man most people have never heard of. His name is Ken Townsend, and he is about to solve a problem that had been driving John Lennon absolutely mad. Abbey Road in 1966 was not just a recording studio. It was the most advanced sonic laboratory on Earth. A place where the rules of what music could sound like were being rewritten in real time by a small group of people who had no roadmap, no precedent, and no idea that what they were doing would still be studied 60 years later. Ken Townsend had been at Abbey Road since 1954. He had worked his way up from T-boy to one of the most respected engineers in the building. Quiet, methodical, precise. The kind of man who solved problems not by talking about them, but by disappearing into a room and coming back with a solution. While Lennon was the chaos, Townsend was the order that made the chaos possible. For years, the Beatles had used a technique called double tracking. The idea was simple: record the same vocal twice, layer them together, and the result has a thickness, a presence that a single take can never achieve. Lennon hated doing it, not because it was difficult, because it was boring. Singing the same song twice, note for note, trying to match himself with surgical precision. For a man who lived entirely in the present moment, it felt like being forced to have the same conversation twice. He complained about it constantly. And one day, he walked into the studio and told George Martin, flatly, with the particular impatience of someone who considers a problem already solved in his head, that he wanted the double tracking effect without the double tracking. Most producers would have smiled politely and explained why that was impossible. Ken Townsend went home and figured out how to do it. Townsend's solution was elegant in the way that only truly original ideas are. It used the machine against itself. He ran the vocal signal through two tape machines simultaneously, both playing the exact same recording. Perfectly in sync, they sounded like one voice. But if you reached out and pressed your finger gently against the flange, the physical rim of one of the tape reels, you slowed it down, just slightly, just enough. The two signals drifted apart by milliseconds, then came back together, then drifted again. And in that drift, in that impossibly thin space between two identical sounds, something extraordinary happened. The voice doubled. It thickened. It seemed to exist in two places at once. There is a moment in every great invention when the person who created it realizes that what they have made is bigger than the problem it was designed to solve. Townsend had built a machine to save John Lennon from boredom. What he had actually built was a new color, a sonic texture that had never existed before in the history of recorded music. Not louder, not faster, not more complex, just different. In a way that was immediately, viscerally recognizable, in a way that made everything around it sound slightly less alive by comparison. The tape machines sat in the room, the reels turned, and for a few seconds inside that studio, the future of sound sounded exactly like this. Lennon heard it for the first time on his own voice and fell silent, which, if you know anything about John Lennon, tells you everything. The effect appeared for the first time on Tomorrow Never Knows, the closing track of Revolver, 1966, a song that begins with a single Lennon vocal, alone, suspended in air, and sounds like nothing that had existed before that moment in recording history. Now, here is where the story gets interesting. Lennon loved the effect, loved it the way he loved the things that felt like magic, completely, immediately, and with zero interest in understanding the mechanics behind it. So he asked George Martin, "How does it work?" Martin looked at him and made a decision. The real explanation: 2 tape machines, slight speed differential, physical contact with the real flange, was accurate, unglamorous, and would have taken 30 seconds to explain. Martin chose differently. "We take the original image," he said, "and split it through a double vibrocated sploshing flange with double negative feedback." It meant absolutely nothing. Every word of it was invented on the spot. Martin was, in the most technically precise sense of the phrase, making it up as he went. But Lennon didn't push back. He laughed, because he understood, perhaps better than anyone, that some things are more true as myths than as mechanisms. And from that day forward, whenever John Lennon wanted that sound in the studio, he asked for one thing: Ken's flanger. The Beatles' influence in 1966 was not merely musical, it was linguistic. When the Beatles used a word for something inside a recording studio, that word spread. Through engineers, through producers, through the musicians who came to Abbey Road and watched and listened and went home and tried to recreate what they'd heard. Within a decade, flanging was standard vocabulary across every recording studio on Earth. Jimi Hendrix used it. Heart used it. Nirvana built one of the most recognizable guitar intros in history around it. But the reach of flanging went far beyond any single artist or decade. Listen carefully to the guitars on Heart's Barracuda. That metallic shimmer underneath the riff, that sense of the sound folding back on itself. That is Ken Townsend's finger on a tape reel. Listen to the introduction of Come As You Are by Nirvana. That hypnotic, underwater quality that pulls you in before a single word is sung. That is George Martin's joke made permanent. And it didn't stop there. The flanging effect became one of the defining sounds of psychedelia, of post-punk, of shoegaze, of electronic music. Producers who had never heard of Ken Townsend, who had never set foot in Abbey Road, who weren't even born in 1966, were reaching for the flanger instinctively. Because some sounds, once they exist, feel like they were always supposed to be there. Today, every audio software in the world has a plugin called Flanger. Every producer knows the word. Every musician has used it or heard it. And every single one of them is, without knowing it, repeating a piece of nonsense that George Martin invented in 15 seconds to avoid explaining physics to John Lennon. There's something worth sitting with here. The sounds we consider definitive, the ones that feel like they were always inevitable, always meant to exist, almost never arrive through intention. They arrive through boredom, through impatience, through a tired musician who didn't want to sing the same song twice, and an engineer who went home and quietly refused to accept that something was impossible. Ken Townsend never became famous. George Martin's joke became a word used by millions, and John Lennon's voice, split across 2 tape machines, pressed by a human finger, drifting in and out of sync, became the sound of a future that no one had planned. That's what's on the other side of the sounds you already love.